Okay, so we're going over example 2, which is graphing a quadratic function specifically using intercept form. So it says use zeros to graph the function. All right, keep in mind that how this is written right here, this is in standard form, okay? Remember, a quick review back up here to our vocabulary. So standard form is when it's ax squared plus bx plus c. And although this one doesn't have an x, it is in standard form. Okay, so what we were talking about is like it doesn't have an x right here. You see how it's an x squared and an 8. So it still is in standard form. The x, like the number in front of x, is just 0. So the b value is 0. But we don't want to use standard form. On standard form, that's where we do negative b over 2a. Because it said use zeros, what we're going to do is we're going to factor this. So we are going to rewrite this. If we take out the 2 in front, it's the GCF, so we'll have 2, and then we'll have x squared minus 4. All right, remember that when we take out the 2, it's like we're dividing like this. So then that can factor again, that's 2, and then x squared minus 4 is difference of squares. Go ahead and try to factor it real quick. Okay, so you'd square root the x squared, you get x. You square root the 4, you get 2, and one of them is plus and one of them is minus. Okay, now that it's in factored form, what you can do is you're setting equal to 0 to find the x-intercepts. So when you set x plus 2 equal to 0, you get negative 2, and x minus 2 equal to 0, you get positive 2. So the x-intercepts are 2 and negative 2. Okay, now just like we had done in the previous video, once you have the x-intercepts, how you find the vertex is you add the x-intercepts and divide by 2. So 2 plus negative 2 is 0, divided by 2 is 0. So the vertex starts with a 0, and then you plug the 0 back into the equation, and that's how you're going to find the y value. So I'm just going to take the 0, I'm going to plug it back in right here for the x, and I'm going to get negative 8. And then my axis of symmetry is at x equals 0. So if we go ahead and graph that, we have 0, negative 8 for my vertex. Whoops, sorry, that's negative 9. There we go, 0, negative 8. And then an x-intercept at 2 and an x-intercept at negative 2. And then I can go ahead and I know that 0, negative 8 is my vertex. So a point to the right of that would be when x is 1. So if I take the 1 and I plug it back in here, feel free to use the calculator if you need to, you're going to get negative 6. So 1, negative 6. And you can reflect it over the axis of symmetry. So when it says, it's not my best curve drawn in, but we're just going to go with it. When it says to go ahead and use zeros, that's how we know, okay, we're going to factor, set them equal to 0, and find the x-intercepts. That's what the instructions said that made me know to do this instead of doing negative b over 2a. Negative b over 2a totally would work on these, but we're trying to follow the instructions and use zeros. Okay, so look at this one. X squared minus 2x minus 3. So what we do is when we use zeros is we set this equal to 0 and then we factor it. So this is a trinomial, so it needs to multiply to negative 3. It needs to add to negative 2. So that's going to be negative 3 and positive 1. Okay, so remember, we learned to factor using the box. Positive 1x minus 3. Okay, I get x, I get plus 1, and x minus 3. All right, and so we set those equal to 0, and we get negative 1 and 3. And those are our x-intercepts. So remember, once you find your x-intercepts, you can add them and divide by 2, and that finds you your y value of your vertex. So negative 1 plus 3 is 2, divided by 2 is 1. And then you take the 1 and you plug it back into this equation for x. Feel free to use a calculator, totally fine. Let me just grab that and do that real quick. So when I plug the 1 in, all right, I get negative 4. So my vertex is at 1, negative 4. Then my axis of symmetry is at negative 1. I'm sorry, my zeros, my x-intercepts are at -1 and 3. I was thinking axis of symmetry in my head because I'm going to go ahead and just draw in since it is not on the y-axis. Okay, so remember we need 5 points total. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is, since the vertex is at 1, -4, then a point to the right of that would be at 2. So I'm going to plug in 2 to the equation, and I get -3. So 2, -3 is right here, and reflect that over. All right, that's a lot better of a drawing. And then the axis of symmetry is x equals 1. Okay, and one more time over here. So when it says use the zeros, this is standard form. So once again, if we just got to choose, honestly, I just do -b/2a and find my vertex, but it asked me to use my zeros. So I set it equal to 0 and I factor. So it has to multiply to AC, which is 2 times -2, has to add to B, which is 3. So that's going to be 4 and -1. Remember, you can list off the pairs if you need to. Totally okay. So I have my 2x squared and my -2. I'm going to do my plus 4x here and my minus 1x here. Okay, so a 2x factors out and a -1. And then this is going to be an x and a plus 2. And remember to check the multiplying, like x times 2x is 2x squared, 2 times 2x is 4x, all of that. Check all the multiplying to make sure you're right. Okay, so I get 2x minus 1 and x plus 2. I set them equal to 0, and that's how I solve to find my x-intercepts. So this one's really easy. I just subtract the 2, I get -2. This one, I need to add the 1, and then divide by 2. So I get 1/2. So I'm going to have 1/2 and -2. That's kind of crazy, but that's okay. So 1/2 is right there, and then -2 is right here. All right, so to find the vertex, you add them and divide by 2. So it's totally okay to use a calculator to do this. So when I do -2 plus 1/2, I get -1.5, and I divide that by 2, and so I get -0.75 or -3/4. So I'm just going to do my vertex. Let's just do it down here. All right, and so then I use my calculator to plug that back in. Parentheses and being real careful with that negative. All right, I got -3.125. So we're just going to do the best we can to graph that. We're not going to be real exact there, but we can try our best. So -3/4 and down -3.1 is just below -3. And then honestly, at that point, what I would probably do to get a couple more points is I might just plug in like 0 and 1 to get a better feel for it. On this one, I'm definitely going to have to draw in my axis of symmetry because the decimals make this one harder to graph. So keep in mind that's -3/4. It's a little over -1/2. So when I plug in 0, I get -2. And so if you reflect that, 3/4 on the other side is right there. And just because this one's kind of weird, I feel like I should plug in another point. And so when I plug in 1, I get 3. So that's 1 3/4 box away. So go 1 3/4 box the other way. All right, that's the best we can do. So, and then just draw it in. So what tells you to factor and find your x-intercepts is when the instructions say use zeros to graph. That's when you're like, oh, I find the x-intercepts first, and then use 2 x-intercepts and you add them and divide by 2. And that's how you find the y value of the vertex. And that's what you do when it says specifically in the instructions, use zeros to graph the functions, or using intercept form. That's what you do.